Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Libby Book Club. I'm your host, David Allen Patali, and my guest tonight is the delightful Anna Downs, who's joining us from Sydney, I think it is. Hello, Anna. Welcome to the Libby Book.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so delighted to be here. Thank you for the invite.
It's great to have you on. I know it's a bit late there in Sydney. I think it's what, 10:30 at night.
It's
Uh,
10:30. Yeah, I've already been out for dinner. I've got a little post-dinner coffee with me right now just to kind of, lift those energy levels.
well, the coffee's going to keep you up, just like your book, Red River Road, kept me up for quite a few nights, long past my bedtime. Red River Road is actually the our book of the month here for the Libby Book Club for WA, and we're going to be talking to you about it tonight. So, welcome everybody to the chat. This is all thanks to Overdrive, Libby, and the State Library of WA. Of course, you can pop a question in the chat for Anna, anything and everything about Red River Road. We might do some spoiler adjacent chat. I'm not quite sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
However you want to run it. I'm very happy to talk spoilers, very happy to keep it, all dark, whatever you prefer.
sounds good. And also, Anna's very kindly agreed to do a signed copy tonight for what we judge to be the best question. I think that's going to be the one that stimulates the most conversation and the most insight. Now, just a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. Of course, I'm wanting to acknowledge that I'm broadcasting tonight from the traditional lands of the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. I pay my respects to elders past and present. And also, there's going to be a recording of this popped out on the YouTube channel. So if you miss anything or want to come back, it'll be there. And of course, yeah, jump in the chat and ask any question that you like from Anna, and I'll weave it in to our chat. So, Anna, I usually would start by asking, can we have your elevator pitch for Red River Road? But I think it's easier if I just read the back. Because,
Sure. I
yeah.
have an elevator pitch, but I'm
Okay.
very happy for you to read the back too.
Okay, well, so on the coral coast of Western Australia, solo traveller Katie is on a mission to find her free-spirited sister Phoebe, who disappeared along the same route a year ago. But as she drives her camper van further into the wild north, Katie realizes she's not alone as she first believed. Soon she is pulled into a complicated web of secrets, lies, myths, and stories that force her to question everything she thought she knew about her sister. In this nerve-shredding outback thriller, our obsessions with freedom and beauty collide with our fear of what lies in the wilderness, and the truth behind Phoebe's disappearance proves stranger and darker than Katie could have ever guessed. It's a cracking setup, and I just wanted to read there was a wonderful line from a review of Red River Road that said, the Australian Tourist Board will never endorse this road trip nightmare, but readers are likely to recommend it highly. I think that would be a very true statement. Uh, Anna, this is a
Which is unfortunate in a way because partly that book is a love letter to WA. So I was kind of gladdened by that because it made it sound very intriguing, but also I was like, oh no, I don't want to put people off.
definitely. Well, I must say I did a lap of Australia with my wife and kids, and I've been to a lot of the places you were writing about, and it was like I was there. It was stunning. At the same time, you scared the absolute shit out of me. So,
Sorry,
so,
not sorry.
so now, Anna, in crafting Red River Road, did you draw on experiences of your own travels around Australia and your connection to that land? You said so beautiful, but also has that dark side to it.
Absolutely. So, interestingly enough, when I first had the idea for this book, we were still living under lockdown conditions and WA's hard borders were closed. The reason that I picked WA and that coastline in particular was because I had a very clear idea of what the story was going to be, and particularly the twist. I knew that from the start. Um, and I knew the setup. I was very inspired by a lot of my friends who were, talking in sort of 2020, 2021 when that real van life trend picked up steam. Very inspired by them and their ideas of what they wanted to do with, van renos and trips. And I knew immediately that kind of doing a van life novel would be really fun. But I was going to write about a family, and it wasn't till the Gabby Petito story broke that I was like, actually, I feel like it would be more interesting to write about a solo traveler or a female traveler, but I really, really don't want to do anything exploitative. I don't want to kind of add to the, um, the plethora of commercial genre novels about dead women. So I spoke to a friend who'd done that, the whole big lap with her family all around Australia. And I said, look, I laid out the sort of the bare bones of the story. I said, I need a landscape that is incredibly beautiful, almost, sort of mesmeric, very intoxicating, but that also kind of is its own uh, sort of literary device in a way, in that it gets darker and darker and darker as you go. And I was like, I'd like it to move into more hostile territory, away from more familiar territory. And I'd like to incorporate a lot of different landscapes as well. So it'd be great if whatever route I'm using is going to go through a lot of different shifts. And she said, "Oh my God, like WA for sure." But she said, particularly, I think first of all, she said, look at the Kimberleys. But then I kind of felt like that had been done a bit more, and the Coral Coast just hadn't really been explored in fiction in this way. And also, as I looked into it, I realized how popular that Coral Coast route is between Perth and Exmouth, particularly with the van life community. And it's a very well trodden path. So that's why I chose it. Unfortunately, as I said, we were under lockdown conditions. So there was a really good chance at the time that I was not going to get there myself. And that was really scary because I really did not want to be this obnoxious, British born person writing about a state and a landscape that I had no connection to and that I didn't know. But I'd fallen in love with it in theory. And so I was like, this is really going to suit my story. So I just cracked on and just, fingers crossed. When I was just about finished with the first draft, the borders lifted and I was able to fly over. I hired a van that I imagined Katie, my main character, would be traveling in. And I got the perfect one as well. It was just to a T what I imagined. And I did that trip not on my own, I have to say. I have to full disclosure, I did that with my husband because we only had 10 days away from the kids. And you know what a huge trip that is. We did it all at Perth to Exmouth and back again in 10 days. Um, which was big. And so he did a lot of the driving and I sat in the passenger seat and kind of wrote. But I fell in love with it all over again. And I think as well, having a real connection to landscape and to place, it makes for a much more emotionally rich and emotionally satisfying narrative. I think also it really helps with avoiding cliches. Like it's something that you might imagine WA to be if you haven't been there is going to fall flat, particularly with people who live there, with locals. And whereas if you've been there and you're able to authentically describe a feeling, a smell, a texture, a color, those are the things I think that resonate with readers, certainly resonate with me as a reader. So yeah, that's why the Coral Coast. That was my experience. I did then take a little trip by myself completely solo in a different van from Perth down through the Margaret River region. And that was about a kind of 5 days or so that I did that. It's
That's
a very
quite a
long
bit.
answer.
It's a great answer. And can we talk about you've got three main characters. There's a great cast of characters, but of course there's Katie, Beth, and Wyatt. But can we start with Katie because Katie's kind of the linchpin of the story. Can you
Yeah.
tell us a bit about Katie and what's her story and her motivation? And she's in the great high ice van looking for someone.
Certainly. So yeah, when we first meet Katie, she's driving, as you say, in a converted Hiace. It's very Insta friendly, very beautiful, very kind of, fully renovated. Um, and she is traveling that route from Perth to Exmouth in search of clues that might tell her what happened to her sister Phoebe. And Phoebe disappeared a year earlier doing the exact same trip, again in a Hiace. And Katie's rationale is that she wants to retrace Phoebe's steps. Um, Phoebe's case has gone cold. Nobody can understand why she has gone missing. Um, I'm trying to kind of tread around certain spoilers, but there is absolutely there is no witnesses, there's no evidence, there's absolutely nothing that can explain where she has gone. Her van disappeared. Um, and so, because the case has been closed, it's gone cold. Everybody seems to have given up a year later. So Katie is like, the only way that I can move on and I can, resume my life is if I get some sort of closure. And the only way I can foresee doing that is by retracing the steps. And so she's using Phoebe's Instagram as almost like a roadmap. So
Yeah.
she's,
Yeah.
yeah, going from place to place and standing where Phoebe stood and looking around and almost trying to recreate shots so she can kind of see with Phoebe's eyes who she might have met, what's the atmosphere like, what's dodgy, what might have happened here. Yeah,
No, I really enjoyed how your use of the social media, you can't help but read between the lines. And also
right.
that Katie's so heightened. She's looking for clues all the time. It just made me as a reader suspicious of every single line. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, which I think comes a lot from Instagram, I think, just as a concept and the way that we use it. I mean, it's hilarious to think that we're kind of curating. I mean, we're curating our own image all the time, and we use social media to put a story out there, if you will, of who we are and what we're doing. But the idea that that is private, or the idea that you're in control of that, is pretty laughable. And I think also, if you know anything about the Gabby Petito story, which for anyone who doesn't know, it was a horrendously tragic real life story. It's actually that there's a documentary up on Netflix at the moment about a young woman who went missing whilst traveling in a van with her boyfriend in the US. Um, she went missing. The boyfriend returned home without her. And there was a big investigation into where Gabby had gone. The boyfriend wasn't talking. Then he disappeared. And then it all transpired that you know, he had killed her. And it was horrible. It was an awful, awful story. One of the things that really interested me about it, particularly, was this social media aspect, because they were travel vloggers, and they were documenting all of their movements and all of their experiences on Instagram. And so when she went missing, it was like the Instagram and the YouTube and the TikTok community mobilized, and everybody was combing through videos and hashtags of that time. And her van was actually found by a TikToker, not the police. So that whole thing was really interesting to me, that something that somebody thinks, that they're creating could also be used in a manner of different ways, for good and for not so good.
And solo female travel is very much it's a real feature of the book. I did solo travel myself, but I'm a man. I found myself in some pretty sketchy situations, but
Yeah, right.
I never felt the same level of concern or possible harm that your characters that women in the world feel. Uh,
Mm.
can you talk us through aspects of that? Because there are tips, throughout Red River Road. There's a lot of discussion, but solo female travel, is it inherently dangerous, or is it something that you just have to be aware of all the time? There was that all the constant talk of trust your gut, trust your feelings here.
Look, I think, I mean, while researching the book, I spoke to a lot, I interviewed a lot of solo female travelers. I have been one myself. Traveled the US when I was like 19, and this is kind of before, pre-internet sort of thing. And I think that all of the truths exist at once, like it is empowering, it is exciting, it is our human right as women to move in the world just as much as it is, a man's right. We have every right to move in the world without harassment. It should be empowering. And it is often incredibly empowering, and it's also incredibly dangerous. We can't argue against reality. Unfortunately, we do live in a patriarchal, to a large extent, misogynistic world, and we are at risk. We are under threat. And so, I was really interested in a lot of the blogs that I found online. Hundreds and hundreds of blogs devoted to advice, safety advice for women. Um, some of which were absolutely bonkers in their advice, like literally, oh, why don't you think about, you could carry a weapon everywhere you go, carry a large hammer everywhere you go. Actually, you can order some nail varnish online, it's special. And if you put the nail varnish on, if you dip it in your drink while you're at a pub and it changes color, you'll know that it's been spiked. Or you could order at very great expense some anti-rape underwear. And the mind boggles. I don't even know what that would mean or how it would even work. But the fact that there's a market for products, targeting solo women to make them feel safe, the amount of kind of money and resources that's being put towards that, when actually that could be put towards educating society at large, but particularly boys and men, about how to help keep women safe and how to be allies. I mean, it's entirely profit driven. It's like what makes the biggest profit, and so that was something that was really interesting to me. And I also, when I spoke to solo female travelers, not one of them said, I feel unsafe. I feel scared. They all said, this is the most wonderful way to live your life. I feel very free. I feel very in control, and the community is beautiful. Uh, uh, you know, and so it exists at the same time. It is at once very empowering and very, a wonderful thing for women to do. And we have a huge amount of horror stories that serve as examples of what can happen when we fall victim to unsafe people, let's say. Like the awful Grace Mullane story that came out from New Zealand a few years ago, and when she was murdered by her Tinder date. I mean, it's things like that. What, you can't go on a date. You can't go
Yeah.
on a date without it's just yeah, the trying to reckon with a lot of those points and trying to kind of wrestle and wrangle with what is the truth, is it safe or is it not? That's kind of the whole reason I wanted to write the book in the first place.
And when we first meet Katie, she's driving hell for leather down a highway, down a darkened highway, in a very scary scene. But she looks in the back of the van, and the doona starts moving. That was quite terrifying. But uh, but it's then that she meets Beth, and that's when we have our
Yes,
when we stylistically we also have our first shift. So we go from Katie's perspective to Beth's.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of the most fun parts to write. I really enjoyed that. I'm a big horror fan, like films and books. And the I knew when I first had the idea, I knew that I wanted these two women to meet in a kind of fairly spectacular fashion. Um, and when I realized how I wanted them to meet, that one of them would be in the other's van, I was like, oh, brilliant. This is going to make for a really, brilliant set piece. And originally in the first draft, That was actually the climax of Act One. Quite late on in the process, my editor said to me, I'm really sorry to do this, Anna, but you know what we're going to have to do is we need to start the book at that point and let's get rid of everything that came before. So, like the first kind of 25% of the book. So, one of our big structural edits was about taking that first 25% and kind of redistributing the information through the book.
Wow.
And so we could start at the point at which Beth is discovered in the van.
Did that open
Um,
up a whole bunch of different avenues for you to explore? Because the back and forth in the narrative is it's like what's important versus what's chronological. Yeah.
Totally. And another thing that happened as well in a big restructure is the very, very first draft. I had written it in a sort of in a very sequential, very chronological order, but almost like, so Act One was from Katie's point of view, Act Two was from Beth's, and Act Three was from Wyatt's. So it was like, I'd written them in an almost pass the baton kind of style, like a relay race. Do you know what I mean? It was like, yeah, now you take over the story. And one of the first things that the editors said was, "Oh, you're gonna hate us, Anna, but I really think we need to chop it all up and like just sprinkle it all through," which was great. I love the collaborative nature of editing, and I actually really love it when somebody says, eek, you know what we should do? I'm like, yes, great. What should we do? What should we do? What's going to completely upend this? Um, so yeah, what was the original question?
Okay.
I've got off on tangent.
Oh, we're talking about Beth, how Beth comes in. She's also a solo traveler, but she's got her own thing
Yeah.
going. Yeah.
Yeah, she does. She's got her own dark history and she's escaping from something that you very quickly, I think, as a reader, you realize that there is a connection between the two. There's a connection between what Beth is escaping and what Katie is ultimately, running in. She's running towards it. Neither of them at that point know what the other's agenda is. So that's the benefit of having the kind of interspersed narratives is you as the reader, more than each of them do about the other. You know that Beth is putting up a pretense. She even gives a false name. She's lying about where she's coming from because and what her past is because she needs something from Katie, i.e., she needs a refuge and she needs to get somewhere. Um, and for Katie, she picks up on this connection or potential connection. But I think as well, there is a big part of her that at the very beginning, you find her in a real state of crisis and she's very lonely. And so immediately to have somebody to take care of, but also to talk to and to uh, she really enjoys the companionship. And then through these conversations that they have, they do realize this connection. And then I think what I ultimately wanted was to show that each woman is sort of the key to the other's mystery. Neither of them would have solved their own mysteries without the other. So it's like that's the whole bedrock upon which the story is built. That they are the perfect people to unlock each other's pasts, and nobody else would have done, if that makes sense.
Oh, I like that. And then I've heard some discussion that they're like unreliable narrators in the sense that they don't quite tell or reveal everything. But I found them very human. They're forgetful. They're not deceitful, but we don't often admit to ourselves some of the things. And that created another layer of mystery. Because I was constantly just trying to figure it out. I constantly had my hackles up, if you know what I mean. Like,
Yeah, but as do they.
yeah,
Those characters have their hackles up all the time, and they're very defensive because they are both, respectively, um, dealing with very precarious, very high risk situations. Um, and so I think that was a challenge and a great it was very rewarding as well, trying to figure out ways to let the reader in on what each character knew, make sure the reader was aware of what each character was trying to hide from the other, but
Yeah.
also understand that there are things that each character doesn't understand either, that they're not really aware of. And so there's a lot of reading between the lines for the reader, which my philosophy as a writer is that fiction, any writing really, but particularly fiction, is a conversation between the writer and the reader. And what I have got in my head and what I can communicate, it doesn't actually have any meaning. It doesn't have any value until you, the reader, fill in the other side of it. And I think I'm especially proud of Red River Road in that it really does leave a lot of space for the reader to um yes, make their own decisions, but play detective along with it. There's a lot of kind of putting pieces together, and the chapters are very deliberately and carefully designed to follow on from the other, so that each section answers a question that has come before and poses another one, and the reader can kind of follow along and be like, oh yes, because well that's interesting. That makes sense because XYZ. And I was always a sucker for those kind of books as a kid. Like I love those. Do you remember those Usborne, like choose your own adventure stories? Love that kind of stuff. Like I just read a really great horror book called We Used to Live Here, um, by a US guy, American guy called Marcus, somebody, and it literally has a code in it that you have to crack, like that you have to go and get some information off the internet and go. It's so brilliant, and I kind of wanted to do a little bit of that to some extent.
Well, we've got some questions in the chat, which you've kind of answered, but I think we can attack them from a different slant, perhaps.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
Jordana's asking, enjoyed your book. My question is, what inspired you to write Red River Road? I mean, you just touched on your love of horror stories, of choose your own
Yeah.
adventure. We discussed some of your during COVID, some of the things you were seeing, but uh, was there a real desire for to write a book of this kind, or to explore this particular area?
So I think part of the answer to that question is about once you become a writer of a particular genre, and that often involves, if you have a debut novel, and
Yeah.
if it goes well, the publishers will be like, great, do that again, write another one. And so, I'm quite happy to keep writing thrillers. And kind of, psychological suspense because, I'm a big fan of that genre and I think it comes very naturally to me. But what that means is that when you're looking for ideas for a next novel, it's very much like, oh, what can what scares can I eke out of this? How can I wring out some kind of darkness and what awful things could happen? And that's kind of how it started, was like, I was stuck at home as we all were, very much locked down, dreaming of travel. And van life was very big here, and everybody that I knew was kind of traveling, and taking their kids out and getting a van and traveling around. And I sort of thought, yeah, brilliant. I would love to write about that. But what's scary? Okay, great. Okay, so think Wolf Creek, like think murderers, think psychopathic farmers, think hitchhikers. And the more I did that, the more I realized that I was falling into some really horrible cliches. And so that's where I was really motivated to explore and find out more about the real lived experience of that, particularly from a woman's point of view. So I think that's where I got really inspired. So that's where it became less of a kind of marketable idea and more like, oh, I'm really interested in this. And I fell down so many rabbit holes. And then, as often happens with my ideas, there's always a kind of a front part and a back part. And the back part is, I don't know if we're going into spoilers, but the twist. And that came from, so I don't know whether or not to say it or not, but the thing that's happened to Phoebe,
Yeah, move
uh,
it. I don't want to know. Okay. Yeah.
I
Sorry.
don't know what to say.
Move
I
it.
don't know if I can.
Okay.
But the thing that's happened to Phoebe came from a very specific news story that I read about. If you've got a copy of the book, there's an author's note in the back, and it very much like it explains in quite a lot of detail what that story was, where I got it from. And that
Wow.
was another thing where I sort of fell down that rabbit hole. And it was almost like, how can this situation, how does it relate to this sort of front end situation? And how can I get them to meet in the middle? Um, that
That's
was
great.
pretty much the process of how the idea came together.
And that flows. We've got a question from Randy Gravitz, who's actually in the United States. He's joining us. Hello, Randy. Welcome.
Hello,
Uh,
Randy. Thanks for joining.
How did you learn about this specific kind of amnesia? Is this where you're talking about it's Hannah up in the
Yes, yeah, hand it up. Okay, we're going there. All
Oh,
right. Well,
yeah. All right.
sorry, guys, spoilers. If anyone hasn't read it, just tune out now. So I came across this story of a woman called Hannah Up who she went missing in New York. And you have to forgive me, I've forgotten the years. Again, it's all documented in the author's note. She went missing in New York. She was a teacher. She went out for a run one morning, and went missing. And people who were looking for her, her friends and her family, they kind of flyered the city. They put up these pictures everywhere. They created a Facebook group. 3 weeks later, she was found floating face down in the Hudson by the captain of the, what's that famous ferry? The Staten Island ferry, maybe, or the Coney Island ferry. Is there? I'm just throwing ferries out. One of them. And they found her floating face down in the water. She was fine. She survived. She woke up in hospital having been rescued, and they were like, "What's happened? Where have you been?" And she said, "I just went for a run." And they were like, "When?" She said, "Well, just now. Like I just left my house to go
Wow.
for a run. Did I get run over?" And they're like, "Dude, you've been missing for 3 weeks." So they then go back over, like they start combing the city for CCTV footage, and they find out that she has been for 3 weeks wandering around the city. She went into an Apple store and signed into her email, but didn't seem to then do anything with the email. And seemed on the video, you can see she's pretty vague. She doesn't, she's kind of, but she knew enough to get into her email. She also managed to shower at some gyms that she was a member of, you
Yeah.
know, like franchise gyms around the city. And she was able to get in by saying, "My name is Hannah Up." She gave her name, she gave her credentials and get in. But she had no memory of it. The footage also shows that she just did not she did not really know where she was, and she just kept walking around and around the city and ended up in the Hudson River. So they pull her out, and she gets back to normal. She goes back to school, and her mother's saying, "I really feel like maybe just in case it happens again, you should wear a tracker." And she's like, "No, I'm not wearing a tracker. I'm not going to do that." She moves to Maryland. A few years later, she goes missing again. And this time it's only for 3 days. But again, she's found in water. She actually comes to herself this time, and she's standing in a creek. And again, she'd gone for a walk. It was the same time of year. Again, she's a teacher, so it was like the same sort of, I think it was like the start of term, so kind of high stress. But she's been missing for like 3 days, just walking around, and eventually found her way to some water. This was the point at which her family and friends were like, "You've got a condition. We really need to put a tracker on you." "No, I'm not putting a tracker on myself. That's a ridiculous way to live." Years later, about 5 years after that, 5 years go by with like no incident. She moves to the Virgin Islands for a job. So she's teaching at this particular school, and she has a couple of very happy years there. I think she meets some beautiful friends, and she's got these gorgeous classes, and everybody loves her, and she's, super um, exuberant. And she goes missing. And when they look back over the preceding days, they can see. I mean, this is all in a documentary, but they can see kind of her identity and her this kind of vagueness start to creep in, and her identity starting to kind of crumble. But of course, they didn't know that at the time. She goes missing, and then this hurricane comes in, and once the hurricane had disappeared, and that there was a big cleanup operation, and they actually found her clothes and her shoes and her car near a beach. And so, like right on a beach. So it appears that once again, she had gone to find some water. And I think even though her mother and a few people still hold hope that she is still out there, Hannah Up has never been seen again. And I think it's quite likely that she drowned. She went for a swim or went into the water and drowned. The interesting thing about all of it is that at several points there's evidence that suggests that she thought she was somebody else, and she kind of, even though she signed into her own email and she went to these gyms, she had this. She was under the impression that she was a different person, and so then you again try not to fall down that rabbit hole. I dare you, because it was so interesting. Um, and it has happened, it has occurred many times, but of course, these people, they don't present as patients when they're in the fugue. Um, they're only kind of studied or assessed after the fact. And so, what got me thinking and what really intrigued me about that situation as it might apply to my story was dissociation as it's used as a survival tool and a coping mechanism. And what happens to women when their bodies are abused and their minds absent themselves, their minds fly away. So with Hannah Up, there was a lot of suggestion about, well, these things are brought on by trauma.
Mm.
She couldn't identify any trauma, but that's not to say that there wasn't any. And I guess I was kind of thinking, what happens when there is such a cleaving of body and mind? And then you have to kind of try and stitch them back together again. And what wouldn't might happen within a fugue like that, where part of you would be trying to claw your way back. She signed into her email. She went to these gyms. She was in her neighborhood. It's like there was a part of her that was trying to get out and say, I'm in here, I'm in here. So all of that I just found so fascinating and so intriguing. And the more I developed this story about somebody traveling by themselves and what might have happened to them and how they might be trying to to kind of find a way back to themselves. Another thing, very, very quickly, was something I heard on a podcast where somebody said going to therapy is like being both the detective and the crime scene. And I was like, that is
Yeah.
interesting. What happens if you are the detective of your own crime, but you are also the crime scene?
Wow.
Yeah.
Great inspiration, right? Yeah. And the question popped. It's that no wonder Beth is so frustrated a lot of the time. With Katie, she's
Yeah.
got a background in she's interested in psychology. It's her background, but and in investigating things, and she's baffled as to some of the decisions Katie's making. But
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, and from Katie's perspective, she's doing everything right. She's doing everything by the book. She's like, this makes total sense to me. But then once when you're in Beth's POV, she's like, that makes no sense at all. Why would you do that? Why would you try and look for somebody in that way? That doesn't make any sense. And again, like you said, Beth is extremely interested in psychology, and that was because she needed to be the key to Katie's mystery. So she needed to have some knowledge. In order for her to be the perfect person to solve that mystery, she needed to have some knowledge so that she would be able to see it. But of course, when we're in the situation and we develop kind of particular feelings for people. I mean, Beth really, she kind of she has a whole bunch of she develops a relationship with this woman that she believes is Katie. And so she doesn't see it as she should until right at the very, very end. But yeah, you're right. Like it would be completely frustrating and very, very strange. But we accept the reality that we're presented, I think to a large part. And of course, Beth herself is she's really distracted. She's got a lot going on and she's got her own agenda. So to a large degree, she's just like, well, you do you, babe. I need to crack on with my own shit.
To maybe just square it back to landscape, I was speaking a couple of years ago to Michael Trant, the author. He wrote Wild Dogs,
Oh,
and
he's so nice. I met him recently. Yeah.
It's, and I just said to him, "How did you do a chase scene through the outback? Because it's just a straight road." And he said, "Actually, I found it invigorating because that's quite scary. It's they're gaining on us
Yeah.
incrementally." I loved that sense of dread you were able to bring out of the landscape, and that it's isolated. And yeah, you can see for miles. You can the headlights in the distance. Surely I can get away from them. Nah, here they come. And
Yeah.
every interaction, every threat was in plain sight, the ones that were in plain sight, but there they were coming towards you the whole time. That sense of dread is fantastic. Was that interesting?
Thank you.
Like you say, with
Yes. So
horror.
interesting. And particular well, all right. So one thing is that as a fan of horror movies, I'm incredibly fascinated, deeply fascinated with how filmmakers play with frame. And so, what's happening, like my
Yeah,
friend's house, I've got a window behind me, but like,
behind you. Yeah.
what if a face was to kind of appear there, or, like a weird reflection or a shadow or something's happening that's kind of blurry in the background. And I think the way that that translated in my brain while I was traveling through WA in this van was in that way that you're set, you're kind of, you're doing this with your hands, and it is exactly that. It's like you can't judge distance when you're out there. And the distances themselves are so vast. I was told that there was a lot of lag time between destinations, but when we were traveling for like 6 hours on a road that did not change. So you just cannot understand unless you've been there how impossible it is to calculate distance and to kind of understand it, and how disorientating that is, that when you're in this vast, vast, vast landscape, um and just the vastness itself is a threat, but definitely playing with that sense of proximity and disorientation. And another story that I have, a little anecdote that happened while we were there, is we were at Monkey Maya, which is a campsite. You know it, right? Yeah. And we were staying in a van, and we got up. I got up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and I bumped into a lady who was walking around the campsite. She had a torch, and she was looking for her van. She'd just come from the toilet. She's like, oh, can't find my way back to my van. And she goes, do you have a map? And I said, sure. And went to get my map. And on our map, our site had been kind of, marked with a cross. I said, obviously, this is our map. Here you go, and good luck, and see you later. When I got back, my husband then went to the bathroom, and he came back with the same story. He said, there's a lady out there with a torch, and she's got a map. She can't find her van. And I was like, oh, I just spoke to her. I'm sure she'll be fine. She's just kind of disorientated or whatever. That lady walked around Monkey Maya campsite all night long, and she periodically would be brought by other campers going to the toilet. She would be brought back to our van because the map she had our site on it, and we kept having to go out and say, this isn't your van. I don't know where your van is. What does it look like? Who are you staying with? And if you've been to Monkey Maya, it is so flat, and again
Okay.
so vast, and in theory, how could you possibly get lost?
Yeah.
But this woman, she obviously, we found out in the morning she had dementia, and she was walking around all night long, could not find her family, could not find her van. And that was another thing that I was like, how bonkers it is that you can get lost in such a place where there is just nothing on the horizon, but you are so lost and so disorientated, even in a kind of a sort of reasonably empty landscape. And that I just felt for that woman, like getting up in the morning and she's still walking around going, I don't know where I am.
What an image.
Uh,
Yeah. I know we're ripping through the time here, but I've
I
got
know, I'm
some.
sorry, I'm a talker.
Oh, that's
Sorry.
great. I've got some great questions here. So, Jay Martin, who's an author, brilliant author in herself, she says, can you talk a little bit about your process? How long did it take you to write the book? Were there parts of it that came more easily and parts that were hard?
Oh, thank you for that question. Did you say Jay or Jane?
Jay.
Well, thank you for that. And nice question. It's a hard one because I don't think I've ever done the same thing twice. I have a I'm not sure I have a process, honestly. I think what I tend to do most consistently is when I have an idea, I will collect information like a sponge. You know, in Charlotte Wood's book Luminous Solution, she talks a lot about heat seeking. So it's just all about that, like and I journal on it. I have this stack of notebooks and I collect information. I collect information. Um, at some point, I will start plotting in terms of going, okay, well, all this information that I'm gathering, how do I make that a story as opposed to a situation? That's all of this information is very interesting. All of this van stuff, all of this, this lady who had this fugue thing, interesting, but without a kind of a character arc, you don't have a story. Without somebody that wants something and something is standing their way and a plan to overcome that obstacle, you don't have a story. So I start running the ideas through these sort of story schematics and start looking for what might be the big change that I'm looking for, or like, I start wondering what sort of character might I find within this particular world. So usually I start with a place or a world, and then I'm looking for what sort of character might inhabit that place, might find themselves at this place. I start thinking about what the moral grey area might be and what kind of discussions you might have around what's right or wrong within that world, within that place. Um, and then once I have an idea about what sort of change I might like to effect, I kind of start hearing scenes, I start hearing conversations, and that's about the time when I can start writing. Um, and then it's very messy. First draft for me is a nightmare. I hate it. It's like pulling teeth. Um, I just try and get it done. However it happens, I just try and get the words down. And then after that, it gets really easy and delightful and fantastic because then you can open the door and the people come in and, you've got your
To tell
editors and your collaborators. And it's so fun, right? Like it's so brilliant to have those people and to throw ideas around. I mean, I used to be an actor. I'm trained, to kind of think collaboratively. Like I've got kind of rehearsal room brain. For me, trying to write something alone in a room by myself for months on end is like torture. I really hate it. So as long as I can organize the idea in my brain and then somehow get it out onto paper in scene form, and I find that that's really helpful to me, is like action, units of action, units of meaning, um, almost like I think I'm quite a visual writer. And then yeah, just whatever I come up with, whatever is then on the blank page, I can then work with and again go back to those story schematics and make sure that we're kind of, I'm creating the most emotionally satisfying narrative arc that I possibly can. Yeah.
It's a great answer, Anna. Thank you. We have a lovely comment here from Randy saying Red River Road was such a complete and satisfying reading and listening experience. I thoroughly enjoyed the story, and it made me ask a lot of important questions. I love your assumption that a book is a conversation between the author's narrative and the reader's imagination. It's a great, and also congratulations today. You're in the top five of the ABIA uh, top 100 books. It's fantastic.
No, it's
Right.
it's bonkers. Literally found out today, this afternoon, that it's been shortlisted for the ARBIA General Fiction Book of the Year, which is just absolutely bonkers. But what's really nice about that is that the category that I'm in, everybody else who's been shortlisted is a really good friend. So
Yeah.
it's kind of beautiful that there is literally nobody that I wouldn't cheer on, wholeheartedly. So it's a real honor, it's a real privilege, it's delightful, and it's a really kind of heartwarming community thing as well. So thank you for that comment, Randy. I'm really, really happy that you found it to be complete. I am very inspired by storytelling as is found on shows like Stranger Things and that last season of Stranger Things where it was a complete circle to me, where you um, right at the very end you go back to the beginning, and that's sort of what I wanted to do with this story, is try and take it right back to the beginning so that, like you said, everything has been in right in front of you the whole time. I'm so glad that you thought it was complete. Thank you so much.
We have one, I think a nice question to end is that Randy's also asking, if I get this right, are you working on a book now? If so, will you please tell us the elevator pitch about what's coming next? Because this will be
Well,
book.
do you know what? I just wrote, we're just putting the final revisions on an audiobook that's actually, it's a novel that's designed to be heard, not read. And it's called Break Me Down. It's coming out with Penguin Australia and Macmillan US. It's out on August 19th. Um, and it's about a former child actor who rocks up in LA looking for a comeback and gets swept up in an elite acting studio whose methods are very kind of unconventional and really test how far she is willing to go for greatness. So that's my elevator pitch for that project. And I'm really excited about that because that obviously harks back to my acting days and all of that. And then I am writing a fifth novel at the moment about which I can say nothing because I will almost certainly change it entirely before it gets printed. So
That's okay. Marlish is also asking, I really enjoy different aspects of Red River Road, particularly how gripping it is from page one. It's also superb visually. Are there any film plans or even TV streaming, something like that?
oh,
Short story. Yeah.
I would love to talk about this. Look, there is that there are, and I may or may not be about 2 weeks away from a writer's room.
Nice. Okay.
But it's all very embargoed. Um, but plans are afoot,
Nice.
and I am very excited.
Well, yeah, that's typical you, Annie. You're leaving us wanting more.
Oh, well, look,
Okay,
it's only because I have experienced firsthand how completely precarious these screen plans are. And like you can tell the whole world that like this is happening, and then it will just fall flat or it'll die, or it will just never come to anything. So all I can say is that I am celebrating the small wins. There
yeah.
are things happening and it's very exciting, and we will see.
Wait,
Yeah.
I love that. Wait in suspense. Thank you. And I guess like a last question is, what are you reading at the moment? What's on your nightstand? What's something that when you're not doing your thing that you like to pick up?
What is on my nightstand is literally 30 to about 35 books in a toppling tower that I fear might actually fall on me and kill me dead at some point. I am reading everything. I get sent stuff, which I think is a beautiful perk of the job. I read horror. I just read the most fantastic book called Careless People by Sarah Wynne Williams, which is a newly released non-fiction book about Facebook. and it is she worked there as the global policy director, and Facebook and Zuckerberg just they brought in emergency lawyers to get her silenced and to stop her, to block her from promoting it. So I was like, right, well, I'll be reading that then. And it's fantastic, and I would thoroughly recommend everybody reads that. I think I
So
read a
what was
lot of
the,
fiction, and I read a lot of non-fiction as well, and that's my top recommendation for that.
sorry, and we're just getting what was the name of that book again? We're just getting
Oh,
questions.
Careless People. Careless People. So you might not see a huge amount of, yeah, Careless People,
Let's speak.
by Sarah Wynne Williams, and she has been blocked by Facebook. She's not allowed to promote it or further distribute it. But Macmillan are currently not under the same restrictions, so they can obviously distribute it. But it's really like I was like, I will promote it for you because it is fantastic and everybody should read it. Terrifying and brilliant.
Well, we can say the same about Red River Road. Terrifying and brilliant, and everyone should read
Oh,
it. And thank you very much for your time tonight. And it was a pleasure to, have a great chat with you, and really appreciate it. I've got to pick a winner of the best question. I reckon that was Jay Martin. So I'm just
yes, that was a great question.
that's the Facebook group there. If everybody can join, if you would like to join our community and get the notifications for when everything's going to come up, and also Jay, if you get in touch with me through the Facebook page, I'll also leave you my uh, Gmail here just in case as a backup.
Yeah,
We'll get a signed copy of Red River Road sent to you. Anna, thank you very much.
certainly will. Certainly will. I will send that personally. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Dave. What a great chat. I've
Oh,
really enjoyed it. It's been gorgeous. Thank you.
thank you, and have a great rest of your night, and good luck for Abia. This is good. We'll help.
Oh, I'm going to party so hard, they're going to regret ever letting me in the door. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me on, and to everybody for coming and for your brilliant questions. I so appreciate it. Thank you.
Pleasure, Anna. Thank you. And thank you, everyone. Good night, everybody. Take care.
Good night. Bye.